Okay, guys, I'm going to take you on a little nostalgia trip. Do you remember in 2001 when the Farley brothers released an animated comedy called Osmosis Jones? In that film, Chris Rock voiced a white blood cell who just happened to be a police detective. Well, let me tell you, when I heard that Chris Rock was going to play a hardened police detective in this movie, I thought that this was going to be a live-action remake of Osmosis Jones. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not that clueless. But I just had to make that joke because I swear to God, every time Chris Rock, ranted about something in this movie as a police detective, I could only picture Osmosis Jones, that dumb animated film I saw when I was like 8 years old. Anyway, that turned out not to be the case. Instead, we got Spiral from the Book of Saw, which was supposed to come out last year in 2020, but it was delayed for obvious reasons. And today, on Round the Clock Frights, I'm going to talk about this film. And as someone who has never been a particularly big fan of the Saw franchise, I do have some things to say about it, some positive and some negative, but we'll definitely get into, how I felt about this movie. But first, I have to tell you guys something kind of funny. So, the scariest thing about this movie was actually the theater that I saw it in. So, I didn't go to like a rundown grindhouse theater or anything, but the theater that I saw it in, the air conditioning was broken. There were two guys behind me talking about their favorite hentai, and the room had some broken lights in it, and it didn't exactly smell the greatest, so it was the ideal environment for seeing a Saw movie, let me tell you. That was honestly pretty scary. That was the scariest part of my evening. Those guys behind me had some very interesting things to say about hentai, let me tell you. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to talk about that. So, let's get started, guys. Thank you so much again for joining me in my discussion of Spiral. If you like what you see here, please subscribe to my channel, Round the Clock Frights. We do have a lot of awesome stuff planned in the works. We got some really big horror releases coming out, some things that I'm really, really excited for. Before this movie even started, we got trailers for stuff like A Quiet Place Part 2, Army of the Dead, directed by Zack Snyder, and that film starring Rebecca Hall, where she plays this woman living in this lake house. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but we got some really cool stuff coming out. So as I mentioned, I'm not particularly the biggest Saw fan. When I saw the first movie, the reaction I had was, it was a pretty decent crime thriller. It honestly was kind of a subpar version of David Fincher's Seven, and both films had, kind of a similar gimmick. The killers in both of those movies wanted to punish people they considered immoral, people they thought deserved such horrible punishments. And it was directed by James Wan, the first film was, and, it did have some decent things in it, but honestly, what kind of ruined it for me was the twist at the end. The twist was just so convoluted and, for lack of a better term, stupid. And the series, man, the producers of the first movie must have realized that what audiences really liked about the first movie was the death traps. Honestly, the first Saw movie wasn't incredibly gory. It was very subdued, and a lot of it was implied. In fact, you mostly saw the after effects of the trap sequences. The Jigsaw killer would put people through these horrific traps, but we didn't see them in great detail, unlike the freaking sequels. I would say the first two Saw movies were the only ones that I really latched onto. The rest of the series, 3, 5, and 7 in particular, got really, really horrendous. And most of them were incredibly cheap looking. In fact, a fair number of them looked like very cheap crime procedural shows, and I don't mean that as a compliment, because, man, they just got progressively more and more terrible. And yeah, I'm not going to say that it's my least favorite horror franchise of all time, but I don't necessarily enjoy watching these movies. And, even the gimmick alone, the idea of this serial killer who punishes people, he considers immoral, this is something that has been done before in other horror movies. In fact, in the 70s, there was a film starring Vincent Price called The Abominable Dr. Phibes. And in that movie, he played a villain getting revenge on people who wronged him, but he would often put them through this incredible torture, and he would set up, these elaborate traps. And, you even have the infamous Batman villain, the Riddler. The Riddler is a villain who would often, challenge his, victims intelligence, you know, that he would put them in these scenarios where they had to use their intellect to make it out alive. But anyway, that's my thoughts overall on the Saw series. So what are my thoughts on this new movie starring Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson? Okay, right off the bat, when I heard that Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson were going to appear in this movie, I was a little puzzled. I mean, to me, that's like making a Purge movie and putting Adam Sandler and Robert Downey Jr. in it. Just these really, I don't know, just the idea of these really big, popular actors appearing in a horror series like this, it was a little weird, I'm not gonna lie. When I saw the first trailer for this movie, it certainly didn't make me more excited. In fact, I remember kind of chuckling because Chris Rock screamed a lot in the trailer, and it sounded like he was doing one of his rants on Comedy Central. I just knew I wouldn't be able to take him seriously in this, but honestly, from what I understand, Chris Rock is actually an enormous fan of the Saw movies. In fact, the idea of this movie was his. He approached the studio Lionsgate with this concept, and to be fair, it's actually not that bad of a concept, and it is highly relevant to the times we live in. I'm not going to get into some heavy spoilers because I do want you guys to see it and, you know, find out for yourselves, but, you know, the concept itself isn't terrible. What really serves as a detriment to this movie is the reveal of the villain. I'm not going to say who it is, but let's just say that I saw this person in another horror film recently in which they played a supposedly clean-cut character who ended up being a murderous psychopath, and it was just it was a pretty lame reveal, guys, I'm not going to lie. So what is the premise of this movie? It's a pretty standard cop procedural, like many of the other Saw movies. Chris Rock plays this disgraced police detective who, you know, is trying to uncover the mystery behind these new killings. The killer is apparently inspired by the Jigsaw killer. And, you know, he leaves all these clues behind. He sends packages to Chris Rock's office, and it's up to Chris Rock and his new young partner, played by Max Minghella, to crack the case. And, okay, so the biggest appeal of these Saw movies has always been the traps, apart from the first movie. There isn't a single horror fan on the face of the planet who goes to a Saw movie expecting tremendous character depth. And this movie, sad to say, is kind of lacking in the trap department. The traps in this movie are pretty average and not overly elaborate. In fact, the best one I would say is the one that appears in the opening sequence. The opening sequence was actually pretty damn effective, and the setup was unique, and there is one particular trap that shows up near the end that was kind of cool, but overall the traps honestly aren't given that much focus. But yeah, that opening sequence, you know, was pretty effective, you know, like I said, and this movie has some very, very jarring editing choices. I just have to say that right now. In some of the earlier Saw movies, whenever we saw someone, you know, stuck in one of Jigsaw's devices, the editing would often speed up. You know, the footage would suddenly speed up and slow down, and the camera would just, you know, act all crazy. And unfortunately, those editing choices come back in Spiral, and they are very distracting. And these are music video tricks. These, in my humble opinion, they don't belong in a feature-length film. And the director, Darren Lynn Bousman, he did a decent job assembling this movie, although, you know, like I said, the editing at times could be very, very subpar. There were some very abrupt cuts, like a sequence would just end. Very poor transitions, you know, throughout the film. And, you know, from a technical standpoint, it looks like a Saw movie. You know, it's very dirty looking, it's very grimy, and, you know, most of the film has kind of this yellowish tint to it, but I don't know. Apart from the technical side of things, you know, the performances were decent, although I have to say, judging from Chris Rock's first couple of scenes, I thought he was going to be unbearable in this movie because, man, when he first appears in this movie, he's essentially doing stand-up in a run-down, dirty apartment, and in the next scene when he's talking to Max Minghella, he's doing more stand-up. And it's not even funny material, and I thought that was going to be his character throughout the entire movie, but thankfully, he does mellow out, you know, particularly in the last third of the movie. He does become more serious, and I was surprised that I could take him rather serious overall. But yes, guys, like I mentioned, this is one of the better Saw sequels in my opinion. I mean, I don't have the highest opinion of this franchise overall, but I would put this up there with like Saw 2 and Saw 6. It is definitely watchable. Like I said, the villain reveal is incredibly lame, and the concept of this movie, is it enough to revitalize like an entire franchise? I'm kind of split on that, because what really weighs this film down is the villain reveal, like I said. And the appeal of, at least, the first Saw movie was that the killer was going after individuals with different backstories. Here, the killer is going after one specific group of people, which it doesn't, I don't know. I just don't think an idea like that has much longevity to it. I don't see this idea really lasting, or carrying much lasting appeal. This is a one film idea, at least in my opinion. If they want to make more sequels, with this idea, I'm not going to say, don't do it. They could definitely, do some creative things with it, especially in the times we live in right now. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but like I said, it is relevant, especially to today's world. And Chris Rock, was he the right man to revitalize the Saw franchise? I'm going to say sure. I mean, if he's a fan of the series, then, I'd rather have a fan of a horror franchise, be the ones, pulling the strings rather than someone who is just doing it for a paycheck. So if Chris Rock was passionate about this material, then it shows. I mean, this is a Saw movie through and through. I mean, it does respect the source material. It pretty much gives the fans what they want for the most part, even though, like I said, the trap sequences aren't very creative or elaborate. One or two decent traps, I will say that. But nothing is as good as the first movie, the reverse bear trap. In my opinion, that is still the best trap in the entire Saw series. The traps themselves got pretty ridiculous, further down the line. Keep it simple, is what I always like to say. And the traps in this, while simple, they're fine. They're fine. So guys, is Spiral worth seeing in the theater? This is the first major horror release of the year, at least from a mainstream studio, so I'm going to say yes. If you're a fan of this series, I would definitely recommend that you go and watch it. You might get some enjoyment out of it. It didn't always work for me, but like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of this series to begin with, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and that's the highest praise that I can give it. Guys, like I said, we have some really exciting horror releases coming out. We have, I think, actually next week alone, we have Army of the Dead, which is set to be another impressive Zack Snyder movie. I was someone who really enjoyed the 4-hour cut of Justice League, so I'm feeling pretty giddy about Army of the Dead, and it will be Zack Snyder's second zombie movie. He essentially began his filmmaking career with 2004's Dawn of the Dead, which is one of the better horror remakes in recent times, but I'm getting off track. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Spiral from the Book of Saw. Samuel L. Jackson, you and your incredibly fake-looking mustache. Did I even mention that, guys? Okay, real quick before I end this thing. Yeah, there are some flashbacks in this sequence in which they show a younger Samuel L. Jackson, and they give him this incredibly fake-looking mustache, and I just got to tell you, I laughed my ass off at the sight of this thing, because for one, he looks like freaking Steve Harvey in these flashbacks, and this mustache was just so fake looking. It looked like a 1 cent costume prop that you'd buy at like the dollar store. It was just ridiculous. Anyway, guys, before I ramble on any further, if you're a fan of the Saw series, go out and see it. And as always, thank you so much for watching my review. And if you like this, please subscribe to our channel, Round the Clock Frights. Please subscribe to our spooky YouTube channel. Have a very scary day, boils and ghouls, and whatever you do, please do not get trapped in an elaborate torture device, because that's never any good. You definitely don't want to get stuck in one of Jigsaw's traps. That would really, really suck.